Welcome back, everyone, to English BookCast. We're so glad you're tuning back in with us for another deep dive.
Yes, welcome back.
You know, if you like what we do here, you find these deep dives interesting, please do get involved.
Yeah.
You know, liking, subscribing, sharing this deep dive with anyone you think might enjoy it really does help the channel grow.
Right.
And allows us to bring even more fascinating topics to light for you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you being a part of this.
So today we are venturing into a truly mind-bending area.
Yeah.
The simulation hypothesis and the nature of reality.
Mm.
You sent us a great collection of material, and our main guide through this is going to be the work of Rizwan Virk,
Okay.
drawing primarily from his book.
Right.
And this really dives into the possibility that what we experience as reality might actually be a computer-programmed simulation.
It's an idea that sparks so much debate and curiosity.
Yeah.
And Rizwan Virk's work offers a really comprehensive look at the various angles both for and against this intriguing idea.
Absolutely. And to really get our minds in the right space,
Yeah.
think about how video games have evolved. From, those old Atari games many of us remember
Right.
with their simple graphics to the incredibly immersive VR experiences available now.
Yeah.
These digital worlds are becoming so sophisticated.
Yes.
It almost makes you wonder if there's a similar underlying structure to our own reality, doesn't it?
Certainly prompts that kind of questioning, yeah.
Yeah.
The way that these interactive digital environments have developed provides a really compelling backdrop for considering if our own existence operates on similar principles.
So, okay, where did this whole idea really take root for Virk?
Okay.
What were the initial sparks that got him thinking along these lines?
Well, Virk himself talks about his early encounters with video games as a major catalyst.
Okay.
Growing up in the early 80s, it wasn't just about playing games like Pac-Man or Space Invaders. It was this fundamental concept that there was this self-contained world existing in there. Within the game, on the TV screen, he describes it as this captivating illusion of a separate reality.
I totally remember that. Even with those relatively basic graphics, there was this feeling of stepping into a different space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as gaming technology advanced, this feeling only intensified. The shift from those simpler arcade and adventure games to the fully 3D, massively multiplayer online role-playing games or MMORPGs like Ultima Online and World of Warcraft really took it to another level. These weren't just games anymore. They felt like these persistent shared digital worlds. Think about it, a world that continues even when you log off.
And then you had virtual worlds like Second Life and The Sims, where the emphasis shifted even more from traditional game objectives to simply simulating life itself.
Precisely. These developments led to some fundamental questions. What happens to those simulated characters when no one is actively playing? Are they still there in some form? Does that world continue to evolve independently? And with these online multiplayer experiences, where exactly is this shared world located? Is it just on a server somewhere, or is it something more abstract existing in this digital realm we call cyberspace? Does it only come into being when it's being rendered on someone's computer screen?
These are the kind of questions that really make you reconsider what it means for something to even in a digital context. Now, Virk also highlights some prominent individuals who are quite convinced by the simulation hypothesis. Elon Musk is one that immediately comes to mind.
Indeed. Elon Musk has been very public about his belief in the strong likelihood of a simulated reality, even suggesting the odds are something like 1 billion to 1 against us living in what he calls base reality.
Wow.
He's mentioned observing the incredibly rapid progress in virtual and augmented reality technologies at MIT's Play Labs as a significant factor in shaping his view.
And that's where Virk himself had a firsthand look at the cutting edge of VR and AR while working with the Play Labs accelerator.
Yes, his direct experience with these advanced technologies gave him a close-up view of just how realistic these virtual experiences are becoming.
Of course, when we talk about the simulation hypothesis entering mainstream awareness, we can't overlook the massive impact of The Matrix.
Absolutely.
Released in 1999. The Matrix was hugely influential in bringing this concept to a much wider audience. The red pill, blue pill dilemma perfectly captures the fundamental choice between waking up to the potentially harsh reality of the simulation or remaining in comfortable ignorance within it.
Right.
That movie really struck a nerve.
It did.
The idea that what we perceive as solid reality could be an incredibly detailed computer program was both fascinating and deeply unsettling for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And The Matrix itself drew inspiration from some key figures in science fiction, right?
That's correct. The creators of The Matrix, the Wowskies, have cited Philip K. Dick as a major influence on their work.
Okay.
Dick's novels very frequently explored themes of alternate realities and this fundamental question of what is truly real and what is artificial or fabricated.
Virk actually spoke with Philip K. Dick's wife, Tessa B. Dick, for his book.
He did.
And she emphasized just how central this theme of questioning reality was to his work.
Right.
Even in his novels that haven't been adapted into films.
Yes, for Dick, this wasn't just a recurring fictional idea.
Right.
Tessa Dick shared that Philip K. Dick had personal experiences that deeply convinced him that we were living within some form of simulation.
Wow.
He believed there were entities capable of manipulating the parameters of this simulation.
Oh, wow.
Essentially altering our timeline.
That's a pretty profound claim.
It is.
Yeah.
And Virk highlights Dick's 1977 speech at a science fiction convention in Metz, France, where he explicitly stated his belief that we were inside a computer-generated reality that could be paused, backed up, and then rerun with different variables.
Okay.
According to Dick, these deliberate alterations to the simulation's parameters were the only way we could even become aware that we were living in such a construct.
So from those early experiences with video games to the significant influence of science fiction and the strong beliefs of prominent thinkers, the seeds of the simulation hypothesis have been sown in various and compelling ways.
They have.
Now, Virk also explores how certain findings in quantum physics might align with this idea, particularly the notion of a subjective reality. So let's delve into that. What's particularly intriguing here is how some of the seemingly bizarre and counterintuitive aspects of quantum physics find potential parallels in the way a simulated world might operate. The idea of a subjective reality in quantum mechanics suggests that the very act of observation by a conscious observer can fundamentally influence the outcome of an event. It implies that reality isn't necessarily this fixed objective thing that exists independently of our interaction with it. That's where it gets really mind-bending.
It does.
So how does this connect to a potential simulation?
Well, Virk draws a fascinating analogy to the concept of possible futures, as it's used in video game AI algorithms. Game developers often map out a range of potential paths or actions within a game. And the artificial intelligence will simulate these possibilities internally to decide on the most effective course of action for an NPC or the overall game flow. This bears a striking resemblance to the concept of probability waves in quantum mechanics, where a subatomic particle exists in a superposition of multiple possible states until it is observed or measured, at which point one of those possibilities becomes the definite reality.
So there are these multiple possibilities laid out, and only when it's observed as it collapsed down into one reality.
Precisely.
And it's quite remarkable that the very field of probability theory was originally developed in the context of games of chance.
That's right.
Or the study of these possible futures in things like rolling dice. So the very mathematical tools we use to understand the probabilities in the quantum world have roots in the analysis of games.
Exactly.
That's a really surprising connection.
It is,
Furthermore, Einstein's theory of relativity, with its profound implication that simultaneity is not absolute between events that occur at different locations in space, also has some interesting resonance with the idea of a networked computer system. In a massive online game where numerous players are connected across vast geographical distances, the central server does its best to create the illusion of a consistent and simultaneous world for everyone. However, there are inherent delays and latency due to the finite speed of light, meaning what appears simultaneous for one player might not be for another, depending on their location within the network. So these foundational theories in physics present some really counterintuitive findings that a simulation model might actually offer a framework to better understand.
Precisely.
Okay.
Vitscher points out that many of the findings in both relativity and quantum physics don't quite fit neatly into a purely materialistic view of the universe. When he was at MIT, he learned that scientific understanding progresses by developing models of how the world functions, and that newer, more accurate models replace older ones if they offer more comprehensive and accurate explanations. The simulation hypothesis in this context can be considered as a potentially more encompassing model that might be able to account for some of these quantum weirdnesses and relativistic quirks in a more elegant way.
That's a compelling way to look at it.
Yeah.
Viewing it as another model.
Right.
Just like any other scientific model that tries to explain the fundamental nature of the universe.
That's right.
Now, another really intriguing angle that Virk explores is the ancient dream analogy and its prevalence in various religious and spiritual perspectives.
Okay.
So let's explore that.
This is where the simulation hypothesis begins to intersect with very ancient philosophical and spiritual ideas that have been around for millennia.
Okay.
The metaphor of the world being akin to a dream is a recurring theme in many Eastern religious and spiritual traditions.
Okay.
Consider the concept of Maya in Hinduism, which suggests that our shared experience of reality is, in a fundamental sense, an illusion.
A shared dream that we're all in some way participating in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Virk argues that even the Western Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, while they don't explicitly state that we live in a simulation, contain certain implications that could be interpreted through that lens.
Okay.
They often describe a world where higher powers, such as God and angels, are constantly observing and recording our actions, which bears a certain resemblance to the tracking of data within a complex game environment.
So concepts like karma and divine judgment could potentially be seen as analogous to game mechanics with built-in consequences for our actions within the simulation.
Precisely.
Wow.
The idea of angels as potential AI-like monitors that automatically record our deeds and perhaps even play them back for us at some point of judgment has a certain resonance with how a computer system might log player interactions and events. And the concept of a life review, often described in near-death experiences and within religious texts like the Quran and the Bible, where individuals are shown a complete record of their lives, mirrors the replayability feature that is common in many video games.
It's really fascinating to see these very ancient ideas finding potential parallels in a very modern technological concept. Okay, so how do we get from where we are now to this potential simulation point, as Virk refers to it?
Okay.
What's the likely technological roadmap?
Virk emphasizes that the incredibly rapid advancements we've seen in video games and the broader field of computer science are key factors making the simulation hypothesis increasingly plausible in our current era. He reflects on the immense journey we've taken since the creation of something as basic as Pong.
From those incredibly simple 2D paddles and a bouncing pixel to the unbelievably detailed and immersive virtual worlds we have access to today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he breaks down the fundamental game loop that has persisted as a core structure even in today's most sophisticated games.
Okay.
The computer presents the current state of the game. The player issues a command or input. The program processes that input and updates the game state accordingly, and then the loop repeats, presenting the new state to the player.
He draws a parallel to early text adventure games like Zork or Adventure, where the computer essentially acted like a dungeon master. Describing the world through text and then reacting to the player's text-based commands. Those early text-based adventures really laid a crucial foundation in terms of creating a world that existed beyond what you could immediately see and introducing this core idea of interacting with that world through specific commands.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They introduced some really crucial elements that are still fundamental today, such as a large game world to explore the concept of a player's current game state, including things like inventory and current location, a broader world game state that could change based on the player's actions, non-player characters or NPCs that the player could interact with, and textual input as the primary means of control and interaction.
And then we transitioned into graphical games like Pong, which while visually very simple by today's standards, really pioneered the entire field of computer graphics.
Their significant contribution was in figuring out how to program individual pixels on a screen and create real-time interactive experiences, which required a great deal of optimization, given the very limited computing power available at the time. These early graphical arcade games were a real watershed moment, ultimately leading to the massive and diverse video game industry we know today.
And the crossover with other forms of media, like games based on popular movies, such as Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T., began to introduce the idea of exploring graphically rendered landscapes and interacting with familiar stories in a new way.
Yes, these games represented a kind of middle ground between the simplicity of early arcade games and the more complex graphical adventure and role-playing games that emerged in the 1980s and 90s. These later games further developed the key elements introduced in text adventures, but with the addition of visual representation. We started to see large graphically rendered worlds to explore, visual representations of the player state that would evolve with their progress and inventory, and the incredibly important ability to save and then resume the game state. Essentially capturing all the information about the world and the player as digital data.
That ability to save the game state seems particularly relevant to the simulation hypothesis, as it implies a mechanism for storing and then retrieving the complete configuration of an entire world.
Precisely.
Wow.
And these graphical RPGs also refine the concept of non-player characters or graphical NPCs that populated the game world and could interact with the player in increasingly sophisticated ways. Then came the development of procedural generation. Perhaps best exemplified by a more recent game like No Man's Sky, which demonstrated the possibility of creating vast, seemingly infinite game universes through the use of algorithms rather than manual design. The sheer scale of over 18 quintillion planets in that game.
That's incredible.
Fear notes might even be a subtle hint if we were ourselves within a similarly computationally generated reality.
It really makes you wonder about the underlying algorithms that might be governing the vastness and complexity of our own universe.
Indeed. The evolution continued towards fully immersive 3D game worlds with the creation of 3D avatars that players could control. Persistent world states that would change based on player actions as seen in virtual worlds like Second Life and sandbox games like Minecraft. The ability for multiple online players to interact simultaneously within the same world. The rise of user-generated content becoming an integral part of the game world. More sophisticated 3D NPCs with their own routines and behaviors. The development of individual quests and storylines within a larger world. And the crucial distinction between physics engines that determine how objects within the game behave and rendering engines that determine how those objects visually appear.
It's that ability to store and meticulously track the state of absolutely everything, all the characters, all the objects, the entire world, as digital information that Vir highlights as being absolutely paramount for creating a convincing simulation.
Exactly. This information exists outside of the actively rendered portion of the world, often residing on servers that are invisible to those within the game, and it's only rendered visually when it's needed by a player. And then we experience the transition from 3D films, which created the illusion of depth, to the advent of virtual reality with VR headsets that utilize rendered computer screens to offer a much more immersive and first-person experience.
VR really gives you that feeling of being physically inside the digital world in a way that previous technologies simply couldn't achieve. And then we also have augmented reality, which takes virtual objects and overlays them onto our perception of the real world.
AR further blurs the lines between what we perceive as real and what is computer generated by seamlessly integrating digital imagery into our view of reality. And Vir also introduces the concept of real-world rendering through technologies like light field displays and 3D printing, suggesting that even physical objects could potentially be reduced to information that can be rendered or materialized on demand.
So almost like being able to 3D print anything you could imagine.
Think about it. 3D printers, in a sense, act as a rendering engine for the physical world, constructing tangible objects based on digital models.
All right.
It all seems to be pointing towards this fundamental idea that information and computation might be far more primary to the nature of reality than we currently understand.
It does seem that way, yeah.
Now, for a simulation to be truly indistinguishable from our current reality, we would likely need the ability to interface directly with the mind, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Virk delves into the hypothetical stages of mind interfacing technology.
That would likely be necessary to create a simulation so convincing that we couldn't tell it apart from base reality. This would involve not only the ability to broadcast completely immersive virtual world directly into our brains, effectively tricking our senses into believing our physical body is actually within the simulation, but also the capability to read our responses, our movements, our feelings, our interactions directly from our minds, and use that feedback to dynamically update the virtual world in real time.
That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does.
Almost exactly like how The Matrix itself depicted the connection to their simulated world.
It does, yeah. But Virk points to some early and foundational research in neuroscience, such as the experiments conducted by Wilder Penfield in the 1950s involving electrical stimulation of the brain. Penfield's work showed that stimulating different areas of the brain could reliably induce vivid memories and even hallucinations in his patients.
Wow.
This suggests that the brain's perception of reality is fundamentally tied to electrical and chemical signals.
And the ability to not only induce perceptions, but also to actually implant specific memories would likely be another crucial step in creating a truly seamless simulation so that individuals wouldn't question their own past or have inconsistencies in their personal history.
Exactly. Her reference is science fiction again, such as the movie Total Recall and the recurring themes in Philip K. Dick's work that explore manipulated realities and altered timelines. He also mentions the significant MIT research conducted in 2013 that successfully demonstrated the ability to implant false memories in the brains of mice, showing that this is not entirely a fictional concept. So we're potentially moving towards a future where our own minds could function as both input and output devices.
For a completely convincing simulated reality.
It seems that way.
Now, what about the intelligence aspect of a sophisticated simulation? That's where the field of artificial intelligence comes into play.
Yes, artificial intelligence is undoubtedly a critical component of creating a truly believable and dynamic simulation. Virk discusses the famous Turing test as a key benchmark for evaluating AI, where the goal is for a machine's responses in a conversation to become indistinguishable from those of a human being. He also mentions Claude Shannon's early work on developing AI to play chess, demonstrating that the idea of machines performing complex intellectual tasks has been around for many decades.
And we're seeing incredibly rapid progress in areas like natural language processing, bringing us ever closer to artificial intelligence that could conceivably pass the Turing test.
Indeed. The ultimate goal for many in the field is the creation of artificial generalized intelligence, or AGI, which would be an AI capable of performing a wide range of intellectual tasks.
At a human level or even beyond. Virk explores the profound implications of such advanced AI for a simulation, including its ability to exhibit spatial awareness within the virtual environment, to engage in complex physical interactions, and even the potentially mind-boggling possibility of AI being able to create further AI within the simulation itself.
That recursive aspect is truly mind-bending.
It is,
AI creating other AI within a simulated world. And science fiction has certainly provided us with some very memorable portrayals of artificial intelligence with varying degrees of consciousness, from helpful robots like C-3PO and R2-D2 in Star Wars, to the more human-like Data in Star Trek, The Next Generation, and the more malevolent HAL 9000 in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
These fictional examples really explore the wide spectrum of possibilities for AI, from those with limited autonomy to those exhibiting complex consciousness.
Virk also touches upon the concept of the technological singularity, which is the hypothetical point in the future when artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, leading to potentially unpredictable and transformative changes.
Wow.
He also mentions Ray Kurzweil's optimistic views on our ability to map human consciousness, potentially leading to achieving the Turing test and a significant blurring of the lines between human and machine, as well as physical and virtual reality in a post-singularity future.
It all seems to be pointing towards a future where the distinctions we currently make between the real and the simulated and between human and artificial intelligence become increasingly difficult to define.
It does seem that way.
And Vera makes an important point about the deeply intertwined history of artificial intelligence and gaming.
Yeah.
With video games very often serving as a crucial testing ground for the development and refinement of AI algorithms.
That's a really critical observation.
Yeah.
Games provide controlled and dynamic environments for developing and rigorously testing AI algorithms in a safe and iterative way. He also touches on the intriguing concept of digital immortality through advanced AI expert systems, where a person's accumulated knowledge and expertise could potentially be preserved and even continue to function, which connects to long-standing spiritual and religious beliefs in an afterlife and perhaps even reincarnation, or the persistence of consciousness beyond physical existence.
It's like we're finding different ways of conceptualizing the persistence of consciousness beyond our physical form, both through technology and through ancient spiritual beliefs. Now let's circle back to some of those enduring mysteries within quantum physics. Revisit some of these and proposes how the simulation hypothesis might actually offer more coherent explanations for them. This is where the really deep and potentially revealing connections between our observed reality and a simulated one start to emerge. Virk discusses the fundamental concept of the quantization of energy. The idea that energy doesn't exist in a continuous spectrum, but rather comes in discrete, indivisible packets called quanta, and draws a compelling parallel to the pixelation we see in computer graphics, where everything on the screen is ultimately composed of these discrete units. So the very fundamental building blocks of our universe at the smallest scales might be analogous to the individual pixels that make up a digital image.
It's a powerful and thought-provoking analogy.
Absolutely.
He also revisits the perplexing phenomenon of particle-wave duality, where subatomic particles can exhibit properties of both localized particles and delocalized waves, and the equally strange observer effect, where the very act of a conscious observer making a measurement seems to cause a particle's probability wave to collapse into a single definite state. This bears a striking resemblance to the way a video game system
expert speaker.